A giant python attacks a canine German shepherd. What these leopards did next will shock you. Deep in the edge of the African savanna, a retired canine German shepherd named Ranger found himself face to face with one of the most feared predators of the wild, a massive coiled python ready to strike. What happened next defied every instinct of the animal kingdom and turned into a story of survival and unexpected loyalty you'll never forget. This isn't just a story about a dog in danger. It's about the unlikeliest alliance, a moment where nature broke its own rules and something truly miraculous unfolded. If you think you've seen everything, wait until you see what a pair of wild leopards did when they saw the python closing in. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. It's thanks to your support that we can keep bringing you these powerful, real-life stories of courage, compassion, and connection. Now take a deep breath, because what happened in the next few moments will stay with you forever. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the acacia trees, casting long shadows over the dry, golden grass of the Tanzanian reserve. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, the kind where the wind whispered and birds returned to their nests. But under the surface of this fading light, something ancient stirred. Ranger, a 7-year-old retired canine German shepherd, padded along the edge of the wildlife rehabilitation camp. His coat, once pitch black and alert with service, now carried the faint dust of the savanna. His handler, 35-year-old Emma Larkson, a conservationist from Colorado, had brought him here after his retirement from the force. He was no longer chasing criminals or sniffing out danger in city streets. But in this corner of the wild, danger was never far. Emma was tending to an injured gazelle in one of the small enclosures when Ranger stiffened. His ears shot up. A low growl rippled from his chest. Emma looked up. "Ranger? What is it, boy?" He didn't answer. Of course not. But his body spoke volumes. He took off toward the trees. "Ranger!" she called, dropping the medical kit and running after him. What she didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that just beyond the tall grass, beneath a twisted baobab tree, a 20-foot African rock python had silently made its way toward the camp's edge. Pythons don't hiss. They don't warn. They strike. And this one was massive, older, stronger, more cunning than most. Likely driven by hunger and instinct, it had slipped past the outer fences the night before. It was coiled, ready, and watching. Ranger found it first. He saw movement that didn't belong, the slow, muscular shift of scales. He growled low, teeth bared, stance wide. But before he could react, the python exploded from the grass, wrapping around him in seconds. The force was like a truck. Ranger didn't even yelp. His breath was cut off. His limbs flailed, then tightened. The python began to constrict, slowly, deliberately, like it had done countless times before. Emma heard the commotion, the rustle, the thrash, and then silence. "No, no, no," she gasped, pushing through the thick brush. What she saw made her heart stop. Her partner, the dog who had saved her life more times than she could count, was limp inside the coils of a monster. Its eyes were cold, unmoved. Ranger's tongue hung slightly from his mouth. Emma screamed. She grabbed a fallen branch and rushed at the snake, striking its thick body with all her strength. But the python didn't even flinch. It had made its choice. That's when the silence broke again. Not with her voice, but with a growl. Low, deep, wild. Emma turned just as two shadows burst from the trees. Leopards. Not just any leopards. The young male and female pair that had been rescued as cubs years ago and raised nearby before being released back into the wild. Emma had seen them around the perimeter occasionally, but they'd never come this close, never interfered. Until now. With a speed and ferocity that no human could match, the male leopard lunged first. Claws extended, teeth bared. He struck the python just below its head, forcing it to recoil. The female followed, sinking her fangs into the thick midsection. The python, stunned and enraged, released Ranger for just a second, and that was all he needed. With a ragged gasp of air, Ranger rolled out of the coils, coughing, wheezing, blood seeping from his mouth. Emma was already at his side, pulling him back with trembling arms. But the fight wasn't over. The leopards battled the python with terrifying precision, as if they had done this dance before. One would strike, retreat, and circle. The other would pounce from the side. The python hissed and thrashed, knocking over branches and dirt. But against two agile predators, working in unison, it had no chance. Minutes later, it slithered away, wounded and defeated, disappearing back into the bush. The leopards didn't chase. Instead, the female turned her eyes toward Emma and Ranger, and for a moment, just a moment, she held the gaze. Then, like ghosts, they vanished into the shadows. Emma looked down at Ranger, who trembled in her lap, breath shallow but steady. "You're okay," she whispered, tears mixing with the dust on her face. "You're okay now." But in the back of her mind, one question echoed louder than all the rest. Why did the leopards come? Ranger lay wrapped in soft blankets on the clinic floor, a makeshift IV gently taped to his leg. His breathing was labored but rhythmic. Emma hadn't left his side in 12 hours. Every so often, his back legs twitched, either from pain or memory, and Emma would place her hand gently on his shoulder, whispering, "You're safe now, boy. You did good." But her hands were still trembling. She couldn't forget what she'd seen. The python's camps, the terrifying stillness of Ranger's body, and most of all, the leopards, the way they had appeared. Not like wild animals, but like sentinels. Coordinated, timed, intentional. It made no sense. Leopards didn't defend other predators, especially not dumbuis, and certainly not humans. Outside, the morning heat had begun to rise, baking the red earth and stirring the cicadas into their summer chorus. Emma walked out of the clinic to catch her breath. That's when she saw it. Paw prints. 2 sets. Not just leading into the camp, but circling it. She followed the tracks slowly, her boots crunching on the dry soil. The prints weren't erratic. They were methodical, as if the leopards had been watching for days. She knelt down beside a large flat stone where the prints paused. They had waited here. She rose, heart pounding. Back inside, Ranger let out a soft bark, half whimper, half alert. Emma rushed to his side. "I know," she whispered, kneeling down again. "They were protecting you." But why? The question stayed with her all day. When a park ranger named Yusuf arrived that afternoon for his routine check, Emma couldn't hold back. "You've been here longer than me," she said, handing him a water bottle. "Do leopards ever do anything like what happened last night?" Yusuf, a tall man in his 50s with sun-weathered skin and a slow, thoughtful manner, narrowed his eyes. What exactly did they do? Emma told him everything. The python, the ambush, the way the leopards had saved Ranger. When she finished, Yusuf leaned back against the truck, silent. "Well," she pressed. "I've seen things in this bush that science doesn't explain," he finally said. "Years ago, there was a man here, ex-military. He had a shepherd, not unlike Ranger. Used to say the dog was his only family." Emma's heart quickened. What happened to them? They died together, protecting a group of tourists during a flash flood. That was 10, maybe 12 years ago. We found their bodies, side by side. Emma swallowed. And the leopards? Yusuf nodded. 2 orphaned cubs were rescued after that flood, barely alive. We took them in, fed them, helped them recover, released them 2 years later. They disappeared into the wild, but they remember. Emma blinked. Are you saying those cubs imprinted on the dog who saved them? I'm saying animals don't forget kindness, Yusuf replied. And sometimes they return it in ways we never expect. Emma looked back toward the clinic where Ranger still rested. But they didn't save me. They saved him. Maybe they saw the same spirit in him, Yusuf said. Or maybe they saw the bond between you. That night, Emma stayed up watching the monitors. The camp's motion sensors had been adjusted since the attack. Every rustle in the dark triggered a soft chime in the control room. Around 2:47 a.m., it buzzed. Emma stared at the screen. There, near the edge of the fence, 2 glowing pairs of eyes reflected in the infrared. Not moving, just watching. She didn't raise the alarm. She didn't move. She simply whispered, "Thank you." And in that moment, the leopards turned and disappeared into the trees once again. But something had changed. Ranger was still healing. The python was still out there. And the wild, as always, held secrets Emma hadn't even begun to understand. Still, one thing was now clear. This wasn't over. And someone, or something, was still watching them from the dark. 3 days passed. Ranger had begun to walk again, though his gait was slower and his breathing still rattled from time to time. Emma helped him outside every morning, supporting his ribs with a cloth sling she'd fashioned from an old field jacket. He hated it. Every bit of him, from the flick of his ears to the twitch in his tail, longed for independence. But his body wasn't ready. Not yet. Still, each day brought progress. He sniffed the air again, barked softly at the distant rustle of antelope, tilted his head at Emma whenever she told him stories. The bond between them had deepened into something unspoken, like they now shared more than just history. They shared survival. But even as Ranger healed, something else was changing around the camp. The birds were quieter in the mornings. The baboons that usually howled from the cliff hadn't been heard in 2 days. And twice now, Emma had found freshly broken branches along the eastern fence, high ones, far out of reach of any normal predator. Something was moving again. That afternoon, Emma drove to the edge of the bush to reset a motion-triggered camera trap. As she stepped out of the Jeep and approached the old tree where the device hung, she paused. Scratch marks, long, deliberate, cut deep into the bark. She ran her fingers across them. Then she heard it. A rustle, low, heavy, slithering, just beyond the rise of dry grass. Emma didn't move. Her heart slammed against her chest. Slowly she turned her head. Nothing. But she knew the python was still here. That night, she reviewed the camera footage in her office, frame after frame, hours of nothing but wind and shifting light. Then, a flicker. 3:12 a.m., the eastern fence. There it was, a shadow. Long, low. The unmistakable movement of thick muscle sliding across dirt. Emma froze the frame, enlarged it. The python was back. And it wasn't hunting wildlife anymore. It was circling the camp. Hunting something else. She rushed to Ranger's side. He was awake, ears pricked, eyes locked on her face. Even weakened, he could sense the shift. "We're not safe," she whispered. "He's not done with us." The next morning, Yusuf returned to help fortify the perimeter. "This one isn't like the others," he muttered as he checked the reinforced gates. "Old snakes. They get smart, patient. They don't just hunt. They plan." Emma's jaw tightened. He's already tasted Ranger once. He'll come back to finish what he started. And maybe more, Yusuf said. You've seen how close he got to the enclosures. To you. That night, Emma moved Ranger's bed into the central lodge. She couldn't risk another ambush. She armed herself with a flare gun, 2 knives, and a spotlight. But around midnight, something changed the plan. Ranger stood. He pushed up from his mat, trembling but determined. His ears twitched. His nose lifted. He growled. Emma sat upright. What is it? Then, a crash outside, loud, heavy. She grabbed the flashlight and bolted through the front door. The goat enclosure had been ripped open. Blood smeared across the fence. Tracks, massive, scale-shaped tracks, led from the edge of the woods and back again. But there was something else. Near the blood, paw prints. 2 sets. Again. She turned slowly toward the trees. The flashlight beam shook in her hands, and then she saw them. The leopards. Watching, perched on a high branch. Silent. Not hunting. Guarding. As if they knew. Emma backed toward the lodge, heart pounding, mind racing. The python was escalating, attacking livestock now, testing boundaries. And somehow, the leopards knew it. Back inside, Ranger stood at the window, his eyes locked on the dark beyond the glass. His body trembled, not from fear, but readiness. He remembered the coils, the crushing force, the fight. And he knew the snake would come back, and this time it would not be a surprise, because now the hunter was being watched by more than just his prey. The air was dry and still, unnaturally so. Not a breeze stirred the tall grass, not a bird sang. Even the insects seemed to know something was wrong. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath. Emma stood with Yusuf near the edge of the perimeter fence, staring down at the deep track marks left in the sand. They had returned at dawn to survey the damage from the night before. The python's boneth was unmistakable, thick, winding, deliberate. But it wasn't just passing through anymore. It's probing the defenses, Yusuf said grimly. Snakes this old. They don't rush, they test. Emma nodded, eyes scanning the brush. It's hunting like it remembers us. Behind them, Ranger was lying in the shade, his breathing steadier now, his strength gradually returning. But something had changed in him too. He was no longer resting out of pain. He was waiting. The python wasn't just any predator. It was something ancient, methodical. And if it returned again, Emma knew they couldn't afford to rely on luck, or leopards, to save them a second time. We need to set a trap, she said. Yusuf raised an eyebrow. You want to trap a snake that could kill a buffalo? I want to end this before it finds a way in again, before it kills something else, or someone. They worked for hours, using steel mesh, pressure-triggered gates, and bait taken from one of the butchered carcasses. They constructed a trap just inside the broken part of the goat enclosure. Yusuf had seen it done once before with a crocodile. Risky, but possible. This will only work if it comes back tonight, he warned. Emma nodded, tightening the last bolt on the pressure plate. It will. It knows we're here. It wants to finish what it started. That night, the camp was different. No routine, no lights, silence. Even the guards were pulled back into the main lodge. Only Emma and Ranger sat in the darkness near the trap, hidden behind a stack of old feed crates. Emma clutched her flashlight in one hand, her flare gun in the other. Ranger, now able to sit upright for long stretches, rested beside her, ears forward, every muscle tense. They waited. Hours passed. Then, just past 2 a.m., the sound came. Not a hiss, not a slither, a drag. Heavy, wet, deliberate. Ranger let out a soft, warning growl. Emma froze. The python emerged from the shadows like a living nightmare, its body as thick as her thigh, its head low, tongue flicking the air. It had learned. It moved slowly, carefully, circling wide around the trap. It wasn't fooled by the bait. Emma's heart sank. But then something unexpected happened. A snarl. From the trees, the leopards again. They appeared like ghosts, stepping out onto the branches above the trap. This time, they didn't attack. They didn't even move a fee. They just stared down at the python. The snake paused. It turned its head upward, body shifting, tension rising. In that moment, distracted, it crossed the trigger zone. Click! A whoosh of steel and tension. And the gates slammed shut. The trap held. The python thrashed, its body crashing against the sides of the cage. Dust exploded into the air. It coiled and struck at nothing, furious, wild. Emma ran forward, aiming the flare gun at the cage. Ranger barked behind her. Short, sharp, victorious. Yusuf came rushing out from the lodge, eyes wide. It worked? Emma nodded. It worked. She looked up to the trees, but the leopards were already gone. Like shadows retreating from the light. They had watched. They had waited. They had made sure the balance was restored. The next morning, the authorities arrived and sedated the snake, preparing to relocate it to a far-off research facility. Emma watched as it was loaded into a reinforced crate, its body still dangerous even in sleep. But her eyes kept scanning the treetops. Ranger sat beside her, head resting against her knee. He knew it was coming, she said, stroking his ears. They all did. Yusuf stepped beside her and said quietly, I think we've seen something here no one will believe. Emma nodded. Doesn't matter. She looked down at Ranger, then up at the horizon. We believe it. The python was gone. Days had passed since its capture and relocation, but the air around the reserve still felt heavier than usual. The animals, once noisy and carefree, remained watchful. The bush hadn't forgotten, neither had Emma, and certainly not Ranger. Though his wounds were healing, something inside him had changed. He no longer moved just as a dog recovering from trauma. He moved like a guardian. His eyes lingered longer on tree lines. His ears tracked the wind like radar. Every night, he insisted on sleeping by the window, facing the forest. One morning, as Emma carried a bag of feed to the pens, she spotted something strange. At the edge of the clearing, far beyond the usual patrol perimeter, sat a half-buried item. She walked toward it cautiously. It was a metal dog tag, old, rusted, bent along the edge as if something heavy had stepped on it. Emma picked it up and turned it over. The letters were worn, but still visible. K9, Tango. Her heart caught. Tango, she whispered. It was the name Yusuf had mentioned. The ex-military shepherd who had died in the flood a decade ago, saving lives. The same one believed to have raised the leopard cubs after their rescue. The one whose bond with them may have been deeper than anyone knew. She showed it to Yusuf that afternoon. He stared for a long time, then said, I didn't think anything from that old dog made it out of the flood. Why now? Emma asked. Why here? Yusuf's voice dropped to a whisper. Maybe the leopards left it. Emma blinked. You think they brought this? They've been watching you and Ranger. Maybe they saw the same spirit in him that they saw in Tango. Maybe this is their way of passing the torch. That night, Emma sat on the front porch with Ranger beside her, the old tag resting in her palm. You were never supposed to be part of this story, she whispered to him. We came here to rest, to get away from everything. But somehow you became part of something bigger. The wind stirred, Ranger's ears perked. From the brush, Two glints of golden eyes emerged, just for a second. The leopards, silent, still. A farewell, perhaps, or a final vigil. And then, as always, they disappeared. A few weeks later, a letter arrived from the Central Wildlife Authority. Emma opened it slowly. It was an official commendation, not just for capturing and relocating a dangerously large predator, but for preserving an undocumented behavioral interaction between species that had no precedent. A leopard protecting a dog, working together in coordinated defense? It was unthinkable. Requesting further study, the letter concluded. Possibility of writing a joint paper. Emma smiled faintly. Science wanted an answer, but the truth was, some things couldn't be explained in data and graphs. Some things just were. Later that week, she installed a small memorial near the edge of the tree line, beneath the baobab where the attack had happened. It was simple. A stone marker, and beside it, a wooden post where Tango's old dog tag now hung from a chain. Below it, another tag had been added. Rangers, engraved freshly. Tango, the first guardian ranger. The legacy continued. That evening, Emma stood in front of it, alone. Well, almost alone. Ranger sat beside her, head raised to the wind. Behind them, the reserve stirred. Birds began to sing again. A troop of baboons called from the cliffs. And in the far distance, just for a heartbeat, a leopard's soft growl echoed in the trees. It wasn't a warning. It was a salute. The danger had passed. But the bond, between predator and protector, between old spirit and new, would remain etched in that soil forever. It was early morning when the first school bus arrived. The reserve had organized its first official Guardian Day, a program Emma had quietly proposed weeks earlier. Part memorial, part education, part celebration of something no one could fully explain. The locals didn't need much convincing. The story of the canine who survived a python and earned the trust of leopards had already spread beyond the reserve, into nearby villages, cities, even to conservation centers abroad. Now, children poured in, their faces filled with wonder, clutching little booklets with sketches of leopards, pythons, and rangers' unmistakable silhouette. Emma stood under a makeshift canopy, watching it all unfold. Yusuf was speaking to a small group of visitors about the importance of ecological balance and the mystery of animal intelligence. Meanwhile, Ranger, now strong on all fours, sat near the tree where the old tags still hung. His coat glossy again, his eyes alert but calm. He wasn't a police dog anymore. He wasn't just a survivor, he was a symbol. The children adored him. He let them pet him gently, and when a shy boy held out his hand, Ranger lifted his paw to rest in it. Emma chuckled. "You're going soft," she whispered. But she knew better. Ranger hadn't gone soft. He had simply grown into something greater than his training, greater than the bite commands, the scent drills, or the tactical vest he used to wear. He was something the wild itself had acknowledged, and in a way crowned. Later that afternoon, Emma walked with Ranger to the edge of the reserve, to a small hill that overlooked the brushland where everything had changed. They sat beneath a twisted fig tree, silent together, watching the landscape. "This place isn't just a job anymore," Emma said, more to herself than to him. "It's part of us." Ranger laid his head on her foot, and for a while they stayed like that. Then, a rustle. They both turned. From between the trees, the two leopards appeared once more. This time, they didn't linger in the shadows. They approached openly, with measured steps, until they stood just a few yards away. Ranger stood too, head tilted slightly. There was no tension, no fear, only a strange, quiet recognition. The male leopard, larger, older now, stepped forward and paused. For a few seconds, the two creatures stared at each other, apex predator and loyal guardian. Then the leopard bowed its head, just a dip, and turned back to the trees. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The female followed, but not before casting one long, lingering look at Ranger, as if saying goodbye. And then they were gone. Forever, maybe. Or maybe not. "Did you see that?" Emma whispered. But she already knew the answer. That night, when the visitors had gone and the reserve returned to its quiet rhythms, Emma poured a cup of tea and stood at the window watching the stars. The sky was vast, the kind that made you feel like time had stopped. Ranger slept curled on the rug behind her, dreaming, his legs twitching occasionally in his sleep. She thought of all the moments that had led here. The python's ambush, the battle, the trap, the mystery of the old dog tag, the eerie timing of the leopards. It didn't fit any textbook. It defied biology, even logic, but not the heart. Because in the wild, where survival often means solitude, something rare had taken root. A bond so strong it broke the rules. The next morning, Ranger's tag was polished and rehung beside Tango's. Visitors still come to see the tree. Some believe the leopards will return. Some hope to hear the growl that once rang out from the dark in defense of a dog. But most, they come to see the spirit of what happened here, the moment when the wild paused and chose to protect one of its own. Weeks turned into months. The story of Ranger, the canine German Shepherd who survived a python attack and was saved by leopards, had now become more than a local legend. It was a symbol of something unspoken, something deeply human. Journalists came and went. Scientists asked for studies. Schools sent letters. And through it all, Emma stayed grounded in one simple truth. It had never been about spectacle. It had been about survival, trust, and a bond no one could manufacture, only witness. Ranger now walked without a limp. He was older, yes, but proud. Every morning, he made his rounds around the reserve as if it were his beat. And in many ways, it was. Antelopes didn't flinch at his scent anymore. Even the baboons who once screeched at him now watched in respectful silence when he passed. One evening, a group of university students visited the reserve. They were studying predator interactions, particularly leopard behavior, and were hoping, maybe foolishly, to catch a glimpse of the mysterious pair that had become famous across wildlife journals. Emma gave her usual talk, scientific facts, data, and the very clear warning that the wild didn't perform on cue. But then something unusual happened. As the group hiked out to the ridge with binoculars and notepads, the sun began to set in ribbons of pink and violet. Ranger, walking just ahead of them, paused suddenly. He turned his head. The students followed his gaze, and there, resting on a low branch across the ravine, were the leopards. Both of them. They didn't move. They didn't run. They simply watched. One of the students gasped softly, raising her lens with trembling fingers. But Emma didn't move. She was afraid any gesture would break the spell. Then, slowly, the male leopard let out a low, rumbling chuff. A sound of acknowledgement, of greeting. Ranger stood tall, his tail still, his ears forward. And then, as if pulled by instinct, he let out a single low bark. Not alarm. Recognition. The moment lasted barely 15 seconds. But it was enough. The leopards slipped away after that, as silently as they came, but the impression they left would last forever. The students were speechless. One of them finally said, "Do you think they know who he is?" Emma smiled. "I think they know exactly who he is." Later that night, back at the lodge, she sat with Ranger on the porch steps, sipping coffee in the silence. The stars above were endless, the kind that made you feel like the earth was small, but holy. "You've changed everything," she whispered to him. His eyes blinked slowly in reply. His body curled against her leg. She thought back to the first night he arrived at the reserve. Wounded, haunted, withdrawn. And now, he was legend. He was proof that sometimes the wild didn't just test you, it embraced you. A few weeks later, the reserve erected a permanent monument near the baobab tree. Not flashy, not modern. Just a circle of stone with one sentence engraved at its center: some bonds are stronger than instinct. Beneath it were two silhouettes, a canine standing tall, and beside him a leopard. Not tamed, not owned, but equal. Visitors still stop there. They read the words. They ask the rangers what really happened that night, how it's possible. And every time the answer is the same: you had to be here. Emma kept Ranger's old vest inside a glass case by her desk. He never wore it again. He'd earned his rest. But every time she looked at it, she remembered what he carried into that battle: loyalty, courage, and something even deeper. An invisible thread that connected him not just to her, but to the pulse of something older than all of them. The wild didn't save him because it owed him. It saved him because it recognized him. Because somehow, when that python wrapped around him, the wild said no. It said, not this one. It said, he belongs here. And somewhere out there, beneath the trees, in the tall grass, in the echo of a distant growl, the wild remembers. Just like she does. Just like Ranger always will. If this story inspired you, remember, courage, trust, and loyalty aren't limited to humans. They live in every heart brave enough to protect another. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this story with someone who believes that even in the darkest moments, something wild and beautiful can rise to your side.